What's up, everybody? It's Marty here again. I'm about to do my second podcast where I go into great detail about one of my solo records. Last time I did Dragon's Kiss. This time I'm going to go into scenes. And thank you all so much for your comments and questions. And hopefully I can get to some of those questions too regarding this album, Scenes. And I'll do some more of my albums later on down the line. But for right now, let's see if we can spend a little quality time together. And I'll get into as much detail as I can possibly drag out of my brain for this. And let's go. So my second solo album was called Scenes. And the very beginning, to go back to the very beginning would have to take me back to when Cacophony was just dissolving. We broke up as a band extremely amicably, all the best of friends, and we just knew that we could probably do better apart. None of us had any money at all. And even though we had some of the best times in the world on tour, that'll definitely be in my book and in the documentary and stuff like that. I mean, lots of juicy times and fun tours and all that stuff. And we really were a happy family, so to speak. But that does not put food on the table, obviously. So we all knew that it was time. We did as much as we could possibly do, and so we amicably broke up, and everybody went off into their own separate bands, and I think we all did okay at that point. Even though we would have loved to have made it big time together as a band, we could see that what we were doing wasn't exactly the type of music that was gonna, provide any more exposure than we had already had. So that was that. And I moved to Los Angeles shortly after that, and I moved into this apartment with two girls that I didn't even know. It was the strangest thing. And we all slept in the same bed, which was pretty weird, but pretty cool, being that the rent was free. I mean, they didn't charge me any rent or anything, but the girls were not, this is really not nice to say, but they weren't hot enough that I would want to risk losing the free rent to make a move on them. But it was kind of a weird snuggling up with two strange girls every night. But that's what happened. As soon as I moved to Hollywood, I started right in with that stuff, and I was living there. It was actually in, what do you call it, North Hollywood? Not North Hollywood. It was kind of right past the Hollywood Bowl. So I guess it's just between Hollywood and North Hollywood. And I lived there with no car, which was really insane. But I was trying to pound the pavement to make contacts in LA, and really getting nowhere really, because I lived in San Francisco prior to that, and that's not really a great place to find your future in music. So LA was a little bit better, but was very, very difficult, having no money and no transportation and just living off these two chicks. But it was a pretty cush setup there for free anyway, so I like that. But eventually I found a place not too far from there, right downtown in Hollywood, on Highland and Franklin. I'm sure some of you know this place. It's right by MI, the Musicians Institute. And so I lived in this totally dump apartment, really dumpy place. It was like $400 a month, which in Hollywood, if you can imagine, I mean, rent is pretty high down there. So if you can get a place for that cheap, you can imagine what a dive it was. It was just really, really horrible. And I could barely pay for that. I'm sure most of the rent was paid by either my parents or what little money I made by teaching guitar, which that's a whole nother podcast. I was never much of a teacher. I had students, and I made money, but I just felt really bad because some people are just born to teach and some are not. And what I mean by that is I really had a hard time teaching kids, or adults for that matter, knowing that this dude shouldn't be playing guitar. It was really strictly for the money, and you do exactly what they want to keep them coming back. And the majority of kids, especially back then, I mean, if you think about it, really flashy guitar was the rage back then. And you get these kids who just pick up the instrument and they'd come in saying, I want to learn this crazy thing, this really difficult thing, this flashy thing. And I'm like, dude, there's just absolutely no way. But I got to eat, so I got to figure out a way to show this guy enough stuff to satisfy him to come back the next week. But it's absolutely useless information, really. And for the most part, I just felt really guilty about doing that, and I didn't really like that. Occasionally, I would have a guy who was really, musical, and I enjoyed teaching those guys, and I enjoyed teaching by example more than actually showing people stuff. So that's a whole long story, but in a nutshell, I really didn't like teaching. I liked the students themselves. I liked the people, but I didn't like teaching, and I should learn English. I taught just barely enough to, pay rent, and I ate almost nothing. I mean, if you look at pictures from that era, I was even skinnier than I am now, and that's saying something. So I barely ate, but I paid my rent, and occasionally I would do these little seminars or clinics at the MI, the Musicians Institute, which was a 5-minute walk from that dumpy apartment. And that was also weird. Of course, I'd do anything for a gig at that point. But I'd go and do these lectures, and that was also kind of what's the word? The word is not anticlimactic, counterintuitive. It was counterintuitive because I thought it was wonderful to have a school for music, and I thought you could only become better by going to a school for learning music. But at the same time, I thought it was really odd and weird and counterintuitive to teach rock music and kind of rebellious music, hard rock, and at that time really flashy guitar was in, and fancy guitar playing. And I always considered that stuff that you skip school to go do on your own, and not an academic endeavor at all. So I just felt really weird about actually explaining that type of playing to people who I think thought shouldn't be in school. Does this make sense? But at the same time, it's actually a really smart way to learn music, is to go to a place where they're teaching all kinds of music. But still, I just, as a rock musician who was born playing rock, I just never thought school was cool. It might be cool if you're learning classical music or jazz or other things, but in my spirit, I thought, you don't go to school to learn rock. What the fuck? But in actuality, you can learn things from anybody, anywhere, and the more that you learn, the better. So I had conflicting feelings about it, but at the same time, I would do an occasional guitar clinic and open counseling, I think they called it, where I just go in there and take Q&A and stuff. And you got to remember, at this point, I was completely broke. Much of the students had more money than I did. It was really crazy. So there was a subliminal message going on that if you work really, really hard and practice everything that I tell them to do, you can one day yourself be as broke and as poor as I am. And a lot of those students lived at the exact same dump apartment that I lived in. So I would finish this lecture where, the students, they would respect me for being this player, but then walk back to the same crap apartment. So what kind of message is that sending? It was just a really weird time, a very hard time. You got to definitely keep your pride in check, that's for sure, because the main thing is you got to eat. Like, a lot of people are dealing with issues like that right now. You just got to do anything you can to make it to the next day, to get a little bit closer to your goals. So I kept the big picture in mind, but doing those seminars and clinics at the MI helped me very, very much at that point. And it was something that I needed to do because I wasn't really hustling to get students. I wasn't a very motivated teacher at all. So I was lucky to have anything to get any money at all. And at that time, I was writing music. I had no band. I had a few friends in LA. No band, but I was really writing music. And my first ally when it came to writing the scenes music was a drummer named Anders, and Anders Johansson. And I think some of you may know him. He's done so many great projects, and I think he's in a band called Hammer Fall, or maybe it's not Hammerhead, it's something with a hammer. I'm sorry, Anders, but actually, last time I saw him, he was in that Hammer Fall band, and that's a pretty straight-ahead heavy metal band, but at the time I was jamming with him, he was like this ultra-progressive, aggressive, hard-hitting guy who can play anything type. Really super, super awesome player with a sick sense of humor, even sicker than mine if you know me. I mean, this guy had some stories that just were mind-boggling. And so I got together with him, and he had this rehearsal studio in East Hollywood, which is like past Thai Town and past all of the Hollywood stuff, and it gets to be a real shady neighborhood. And he had this little rehearsal space in this totally worn down, beat down, dilapidated building. There was like asbestos all over the place, and syringes all over the place, and a lot of like the junkie bands would play there, and there were some glam bands playing there, and it was really a sketchy place. But I would work out my ideas with him, and a lot of the ideas were, just things that I had been stockpiling to be my next solo album, the I can't think in English anymore, the follow-up to Dragon's Kiss. So the stuff I was writing with Anders was pretty aggressive, pretty progressive, and pretty heavy. I mean, the guy had a really solid heavy beat. One gripe I have with a lot of progressive drummers is they don't play the solid Tommy Lee beats. And those Tommy Lee beats sound so incredibly heavy when put into a heavy context. And a lot of really progressive fancy drummers don't have that fatness in their spirit. I mean, they play some amazing things. But at least for my music, I have a lot of points where I need the drums simplified and played like a caveman beating someone over the head with a club, and then go into some insane phrase that you need to be a very progressive guy to play. So I need both, and Anders was that. And so we had written a lot of things together, and a lot of heavy stuffs and heavy motifs, and I was stockpiling all this stuff. And some balladish stuff, but for the most part it was pretty high energy, melodic things along the lines of Dragon's Kiss. I mean, it was probably the sequel to Dragon's Kiss, so to speak, and I probably called it Dragon's Kiss 2 at the time as a mock title. And then luckily I got a few auditions. One was for Madonna's band, which was to be held kind of down the street in Hollywood. And another one was for Megadeth, and I got the Megadeth gig, as I think a lot of you know. And then we went on to do some really, really great stuff together. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. It was like, playing with my high school buddies. I mean, everybody just was on the same page with what we wanted to do musically, and I just loved it. So I got that gig before the Madonna audition was to happen, even though I'd prepared a bunch of Madonna songs. And I'm quite sure that there are a lot of people who could play that Madonna stuff way better than I could. And I was much more suited to Megadeth. And so I was lucky. And then ironically, Madonna got a great heavy metal style guitarist in her band several years later, a guy named Marty Friedman, I believe. And this dude is amazing. And a full-on metal guy, so who knows, what people were looking for. But at the time, I was just learning all of this. In Japanese, they call it cutting, the rhythm guitar style in pop music. I don't know what you call it in English, but I guess Nile Rodgers type of guitar playing. And, I could probably fake it for a gig. It wasn't deeply in my soul, and metal stuff in Megadeth was, so I was glad to get that gig. So my solo project was shelved for quite some time because I was just way too busy doing exactly what I wanted to do, playing aggressive music in a great band. And so I loved it. And we made Rust in Peace and did a big tour on that. And it was a wonderful, wonderful experience in every possible way. And then when it came time to have a little time off, I started to revisit the idea of doing a second solo album, not only because I was contractually obligated to do it, but it just felt like it would be fresh to go in the studio and do a record after having all of these new experiences and see where that takes me. So I went back to listen to the demos that I made with Anders in that really insane practice space. Actually, we also did some recording, some rehearsals in MI. The nice people at MI allowed us to rehearse in there, which was fantastic. So I did a lot of recording. When I say recording, back then it was just a cassette player. I got one of these cassette recorders at one of those, fake electronic stores in Hollywood, where they have, most of them are in New York. If you go down near Times Square, they have all these like cheesy electronic stores with knockoffs of stuff. And they had a few of those in Hollywood. So I got this cassette recorder that I had for years, and I used it for years. You just can record on it, and you can actually dub things on it, very, very primitively. But I recorded all of the ideas with Anders, and then when I came off tour, I went back and listened to these cassettes, and I'm like, well, this is really close to what I'm doing in Megadeth every single night. And, as much as I loved it, I really needed a breath of fresh air musically, because when you go on tour, I'm sure some of you out there know, you pretty much play the same thing every night. As much as you love it, it is the same. And there wasn't a whole lot of lakes and valleys, peaks and valleys in Megadeth's music back then. It was just pretty much full throttle from beginning to end, which is cool in itself. I mean, a lot of my favorite bands are like that. But when I came off the road, it just seemed completely ridiculous to go in the studio and do more of stuff that I've done so much of over the last couple years. So I listened to those demos that I had made in a completely different light. I listened to the melodies, and I started to think of a different context to play the exact same melodies. At that time, I wasn't nearly as fluent in coming up with melodies as I am now, so if I came up with a nice melody, it would be kind of a big deal, and I didn't want to waste it. So a lot of this stuff was really intended to be heavy rock, heavy metal, and really, bust your balls type of full on, I don't know the phrases anymore. What's the word? Balls to the wall. So long since I've been in America, I don't know what the slang is. But full on, full throttle, heavy stuff, kind of like Dragon's Kiss. And so what did I do? I took any melody that was worth keeping off of these cassettes, and I started to think about them in a different context. And at that time, I was a big fan of Kotaro. And I discovered Kotaro in the early Cacophony days. It was just such soothing music. And it was very helpful to me when I was recording Cacophony and Dragon's Kiss, because at that time we were on such a budget that we would work like 16, 18 hours a day of playing all of that insane music. I mean, we were like, doing all of this. At that time, it was really quite difficult. I mean, right now when I listen to it, people ask, can you still play? I saw in the questions, can you still play a lot of that crazy Cacophony stuff? And the answer is, it would be much easier to play that Cacophony stuff than the stuff that I'm doing now. The Cacophony stuff sounds crazy, and it definitely was. But if you think about the way I've evolved over my career, musically, the depth of what goes into the music making that I'm doing now is just so much deeper than Cacophony was. I mean, Cacophony sounds really crazy, and it was, but the depth of it is nowhere near the type of things that I'm doing now. So it would really be quite easy to do those kind of things again if I were to ever do such a tour. But I'm so much more enamored with what I'm doing lately that I really don't really see a reason to go back and do that. Although I do resurrect some of those things now and then. On the last tour I did Ninja, some of Ninja, and you never know. But so when I was doing Cacophony, it was really, really a crazy musical day of recording every single day, and I could never sleep, and I had to wake up early the next day and get started again. So to try to sleep, I would listen to Kotaro's music, and that was the only thing that would let me get some rest, and it really relaxed me. And I thought, wow, this is a really cool thing to exist, you know what I mean? A music that can kind of healing music. And when you think of the term healing music, you think of this goofy new age stuff with crystals and all that nutty stuff that I don't even know how to describe it. But I always thought, when I heard the words healing and music together, I just rolled my eyes at it, and probably still do for the most part. But I do believe that certain music can heal, but I think it's completely different for every single person. I mean, when I'm like really, really overworked and feel horrible, for some reason the Beach Boys always just kicks my ass back into gear. So but you wouldn't call that healing music. So off on a tangent again, I'll go back to the story. So I was listening to Kotaro a lot, and during those Cacophony days, and I became a big fan of the simplicity of his music and the nice arrangements. And I had met Kotaro in LA when I was when I was rehearsing with Megadeth. We rehearsed at a place called the Power Plant, someplace where it was a professional rehearsal studio, and there would be a lot of other artists rehearsing there at the same time in several different studios. A lot of great people came in there, and when we were there was Ozzy was there, and Danny Elfman was there with Oingo Boingo, and Kotaro was there, and Spinal Tap was there, and they actually came into our rehearsal in full character, and they didn't even break character when they were talking to us. It was such a treat. It was such a cool thing. So anybody could show up at that rehearsal space, and I met Kotaro, and I was totally fanboyed out. And he was a super nice guy, and I became good friends with his keyboard player, Brian Beckvar. And so just as a just for the hell of it, I called Brian Beckvar and I said, let's work on some of this music, because I knew that if he was in Kotaro's band, that he could definitely relate to the new interpretation that I wanted to do on these formerly heavy metalish melodies. And so I went to his studio and worked on these melodies and had him do different kind of Kotaro-ish interpretations of these melodies, and I was just blown away how much I was liking it. At first I thought it wasn't going to work and I was going to have to just start from scratch and write new melodies, but they seemed to work. And Brian was a beautiful pianist. He could just really relate to feelings and emotions that were coming out of my music. A lot of guys can't do that. A lot of pianists tend to rely on the sheet music, and they can play anything you put in front of them nicely. But when you try to get them to come up with their own parts to match my parts, a lot of people fall short there, and Brian didn't. He really came to the party big time, not only with parts to play, but sonically, sounds and things like that. So I immediately took him on as an ally for the project. And then just out of the blue, I just said, why don't I call Kotaro up and see if he'd be interested in producing the record. And obviously I knew Brian, but I also knew another mutual friend of Kotaro, and I had met him, so he knew who I was, but he had no idea what kind of music I was making, and it was very different from Kotaro. So who knew? I knew he was going to turn me down, but I asked him if he'd be interested, and just out of the blue he said, yeah, I'd love to do it. And I was just blown away with that. So what I did was I worked on a whole bunch of demos with Brian Beckvar, and then I sent them to Kotaro, and we were never in the same room on this, if I remember correctly, but we did a lot of very primitive trading of ideas, and his ideas matched my stuff so well. Just little embellishments. A thing as simple as a tambourine or as a synth line could just bring my melodies to new levels that would inspire me to come up with other parts on top of that. So it was great to have him on board. He was busy with his own thing, so he only actually did half of the album, the first half of the record. But I was so inspired by what he did that I learned from it and had Brian emulate Kotaro's ideas on the rest of the record. So it's really hard to tell where Kotaro's work ends and the rest of it begins. So that was a wonderful thing to have him do. So when it came to recording the record, man, this is going to be long. When it came to recording the record, one crazy thing that we did once I realized that I had the music is I decided to do the drums last, which is kind of ridiculous, but it worked in this case, and I'm not really sure why it worked. But what we did was I tracked everything to a click. I started with a keyboard which was smart, so it would have a good tuning reference. I started with all the keyboard parts, and then I put my guitar parts, and then drums, and bass was actually last. So bass was the last thing on the record, which does not make sense, and I don't remember why I did that. But I did every single thing to a click. All of the overdubs, all of the keyboard overdubs, all the guitar parts, the clean guitars, the distorteds, the rhythms, the melodies, the solos, the harmonies, every single thing was to a click. And I had got pretty decent at playing to a click, thanks to the Megadeth recording where we did a bunch of stuff to a click. In Cacophony, I don't believe we played to a click. It could be wrong. I could be wrong. But when it came time to do scenes, it was all to a click. So I had prepared all of my demos to a click. So it was really not inspiring at all at the beginning. It was just naked tracks. You just have to trust that the thing is going to come out good in the end. And so you do one track and you just know that it's in tune and it's in time and you like it. And you kind of got to play without the inspiration of playing to a full band, which is kind of it's kind of like doing it raw, so to speak. But actually not. Doing it raw is a lot easier than not doing it raw, but that's a whole nother story. But I just remember really making sure everything was in time and everything felt good, and trusting that when it came time to do drums and bass that it was all where it should be. And then there's a story that I've told many times about the clean guitar that is on scenes. This was a miracle, how this happened. A lot of people comment on this sound and the clean, glassy, almost acoustic, but not quite, kind of expressive guitar sound that I got for all of the clean parts on scenes. The way this happened was, it's really weird. I was doing my guitar parts. I might not have even been on a guitar day. It was in the early stages of recording, so it was just dull, click track recording. And suddenly this girl came into the studio. I was recording at Sound City in Van Nuys, North Hollywood, which is a legendary studio. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors was done there, and Nirvana, Nevermind, and it was just a really wonderful studio. But it was going under construction, and so the looks of it from the outside just looked like crap, but on the inside all of the studio stuff was intact. In walks this really gorgeous girl with a guitar case. And, normally when I'm recording, I don't really like anybody coming in there, but if you're a gorgeous girl, you kind of get a free pass, I guess, and luckily it must have been on a keyboard day. If it was a guitar day, I probably would have just told her to get out anyway. But she came in with this guitar case, and apparently she was a rep from the Fernandez Guitar Company. And I was a Jackson endorsee, dyed-in-the-wool Jackson guy. I'd been playing Jackson for years at that point. And she came in with this guitar case and this ugly-ass looking guitar. It was like a light greenish white puke-looking thing, and she said, I'm from Fernandez, and we got this new guitar that if you'd like to give it a try, definitely, put it up and try it sometime. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Happy to do that. Thanks for coming. And because she was so cute, I was like, okay, well, hang out and, stick around for the session, and you can leave the guitar over there. And so she left the guitar in the corner, and then she eventually left, and she was a very, very nice girl, and left the guitar there. And then I completely forgot about it. Completely forgot about this guitar and went along with my business for a couple more weeks and recorded all the keyboards, all of the guitar solos and all of the rhythm guitars, everything but the clean guitars. And so I was going through my collection of guitars to try to get a clean tone. These were to be my last guitar tracks on the record. And, I went through my Jacksons, which had decent clean tone, but it was very, normal. And then I still had some of my Carvins from beforehand, and I tried those, and, those were okay. And then somebody brought in a few Strats, which were better, but everybody knows what a Strat sounds like, and so I wasn't like getting a hard-on for any of these guitars. And completely forgot about this case that was in the corner for must have been 3 weeks or a month before we got to this. and opened it up, and oh yeah, that chick brought this guitar in here. And then we put it up completely random, and we put it up through a quadriverb on a preset. And like, as anybody who knows me, when I'm trying stuff out, I just plug it in and go. I don't like to dig around with knobs. You know, if it's a great sound out of the box, then you can maybe tweak it later. So whatever preset was on the quadriverb at the time was what we plugged it into. And I still remember to this day, I mean, I'm not a techie at all, but it was such a inspirational sound that I still remember to this day what preset was on that quadriverb. It was called Wet Rhythm Guitar, and I believe it was preset number 59 on the quadriverb. I mean, that speaks volumes about what I can't think in English. What's the word? What an impression that left on me. So as soon as we plugged it in, I played one note on this guitar. I'm like, don't touch anything. This sound, this is the sound. This is the clean sound that I'm going to be able to use to make these melodies do what I want them to do. And it was just like the heavens parted. It was really amazing. The sound was just gorgeous. Nobody tweaked a single thing. It was exactly how we just randomly plugged in for the rest of the entire session. So it was basically this Fernandez Strat type of guitar with all these knobs and what do you call those little toggle switches, but tiny ones. Not like a big toggle switch, but those little teeny weeny toggle switches that have like 5 little sub toggles to them, and it's like just absolute nonsense that I would never ever get on purpose. It was all of the things that I wouldn't like in a guitar, and it had like this bar on it that I immediately got rid of. Just a guitar that I would never give a second look to, but it just had the sound of the gods. I just absolutely loved it. And I went through and played all the clean guitars on the record, and it was just magic. I just loved it. So thanks to the girl from Fernandez and for making that happen. And from then, I just became a real fan of that guitar, and I still have that guitar. I still have it. It's really a super, super guitar, and I still use it for clean stuff every once in a while. So anyway, I lucked out on that. And then we went and did the drums. And it was Nick Menza, who is just a super, super musician. I mean, you know him from Megadeth, but in that capacity, it kind of didn't really show the full spectrum of what he was about. I mean, he grew up around jazz and was a rock fan, and I don't think he was one of those dyed-in-the-wool thrash metal guys at all. I think he was just a very, very well-rounded musician who could authentically, fit into anything. So what I think he really did for Megadeth was he played music that was kind of thrash metal in nature, but he played really authentic rock spirit behind that. So he played kind of thrashy beats when they needed to be that way, but they were done with rock spirit and a lot of rock know-how, which is something that not a lot of thrash metal drummers at the time did. And it was probably one of the things that was responsible for putting us in the mainstream, if even subliminally, because, at that time especially, real authentic thrash metal was not in the public conscience. So subliminally, Nick's rock spirit and abilities really helped allow normal people to enjoy our music as well, and thrash fans to enjoy it in kind of a rock capacity. So I always thought that he was super talented. And then I go and ask him to play this kind of Kotaro-ish kind of music that had never really been done before, really. The way I was envisioning it. It was kind of like Kotaro, but more, I don't know, kind of, I can't say more this or more that, but I was inspired by Kotaro, but Kotaro didn't really have the rock spirit that I was going for, and I was going for an even more sad, more melancholy version of music than what Kotaro did. Kotaro had a really strong psychedelic image to his melodic content, and I had a more kind of melancholy, sad and lonely, not depressed, but just kind of a tear-jerking kind of quality to it. So it was different, but for drums, it was nothing like Megadeth for Nick Menza, but he came in there, and when he started playing to these tracks, I mean, everything except bass was done, so he was basically playing to a band. And as soon as his drum tracks hit my guitar tracks, it was like magic happened again. And the engineer was just started to get really excited about it. You know, a guy named Steve Fontano, who I love very much and worked with so much before that. You know, he was always very, very cool, you know, and he would never get overly excited about anything because he'd done everything already. But to see him get really excited about these tracks and really get pumped about mixing it and really get involved really kind of rubbed off on me, and I'm like starting to think that the record's coming out really, really well. And even when he would do these rough mixes of the songs, you know, in between sessions, he would call them masterpiece mixes, and he just really got on board with it and really made things sound really good. So Nick Menza really brought the thing up so many levels. And then finally, I believe I played bass, which is a fatal mistake. And I think I did that a lot back then. God knows how much better it would have been had I had a real bass player play on it. But I think I knew exactly how I wanted the bass parts to be, and it would probably have been quicker for me to just do it myself than to explain it and have other unnecessary flavors in there. But I'm completely convinced that a professional bassist would have done a better job than I would have. But I worked really hard on getting those bass parts to sound like a real bassist played them, and they came out okay. And the record came out, you know, in a way that I was very happy with. But a lot of people asked me about the songwriting itself on Scene, so I'm going to go into detail about each song, and hopefully that will give you a little insight on that. So the first song, it's actually two songs together, Tibet and Angel, and I still play them now, and they work. I mean, they work. They're kind of timeless, luckily. I've played them with full orchestras. I've played them with my band. I've played them with a small string section, and they just work for some lucky reason. And the way I wrote this was, this can also answer another person's question. I noticed someone said, how do you unlock your own creativity and not rely on copying other people's things that have already been done, which is something that a lot of people do, especially young musicians do it a lot, because that's how they learn. They learn from other music. They copy it, they learn it, and then when it comes time to make their own music, they find that their only reference point is other people's music, so their own music sounds like what they're influenced by. And I get it. And the way Tibet and Angel was written is probably a way that can kind of answer that question and help you unlock your own creativity and not rely on other people as much. And this is something that I did a lot back in those days, because like I said before, it was hard to come up with a melody, a nice melody, because, if you're a young musician, you only have so much life to draw upon. You know what I mean? Melodies that represent you yourself, that's kind of a tall order. You have to have some life in there. When you hear somebody playing, you're really hearing their life, and sometimes it's really easy to hear their life in their music. And it's oftentimes, I will get a lot of CDs and demos from young guitarists and even professionals, and there's a lot of really fast, technical, busy playing going on, and I can really see their life. And what I see is a guy sitting in front of a metronome practicing religiously for hours, and that's what I see. And that's kind of not very interesting for the listener. And I think, people listening actually see the life of people. You listen to Miles Davis, and you see like a lot of jazz sessions, and you see a lot of hard knocks going through the world of jazz, and you listen to any artist, and you can kind of see their life. I mean, you can see loneliness that's happened in their lives, and longing for people in their lives. And that's, the longer you live in life, you have more things to draw on, you know what I mean? And in my case, it was definitely missing my family is a big thing. Outside of having to make a decision, to follow my music, I had to leave the country I was born in, and missing my family and longing for my family and not being so close to my family has been a big, obviously a big life thing that is, it's got to show up in my music. And every big life thing happens when you lose a loved one. That shows up in your music, and when you make a big, commitment, and you have big life experiences, and even small life experiences, they all take place and come out in your life and your surroundings. Like, I'm fortunate to be surrounded by so many different countries over my career, and soaked up their music, and living in Japan and living in Germany and Hawaii as a kid. All those things come out. And so hopefully when you listen to my music, you hear those things. So young people will ask how to, tap into their creativity rather than just doing things that they learn from other people. Well, it's really not something you can practice. You just have to live it. And you don't want your music to be heard and have people say, well, this guy definitely sits in front of a metronome really, really well for many, many hours. Of course, that work must be done at some period of time in your development, but you don't want that to be the thing that comes through when the people on the other end are hearing your music. So back to how I combated this situation when I was a lot younger is I would just sit and record randomly. I would play myself completely at random and just try to be completely free in what I'm playing. Not any kind of rhythm, no beats, no chord progressions, no riffs, nothing. Just sit there and play and record it for maybe, an hour. And maybe more, as long as you want. Just sit there and play randomly. Slower is often better because you're more likely to come up with something that you can learn again later. But no restrictions. Just play as random as you can, and put the tape aside and forget about it for a week or a month or even a year or however long. And then when you listen to it later, it's almost like listening to somebody else, and you can have a completely objective sonic opinion about what these things are. And you listen back and you go, oh, that little thing is cool in there. And maybe like 5 seconds, you might just get 5 seconds of coolness out of the hour. But that 5 seconds will start you on the path of, writing something cool. So it's way worth it. So say you find a passage in this 1 hour of jamming that you do. Then you take that and you analyze it and you learn it. And then you try to play possibly a different chord. You play several different chord progressions over it. You loop this little part. And then the longer the part is, the more interesting the chord progression can eventually be. And sometimes, even when you play a random chord progression over your part that you like, you find these magical things that you would have never come up with had you only used your musical theory to think of what notes work over what chords. See what I'm saying? So sometimes when you randomly play chords over a piece of music, you'll stumble onto some new musical things that you would have never come up with because your brain is not deep enough musically yet to do that. And when you're younger, there's just no depth in you don't really think in depth yet. So this process that I did a lot in Cacophony days, and I definitely did it on the Tibet and Angel song. I remember doing it. I remember sitting up in the rehearsal room with a cassette player, and I just was thinking about what was going on in my life. I wasn't really thinking about the notes I was playing. I was just normal human romantic type of stuff, and I miss this chick or whatever, whatever normal thing that you're thinking about. And you just go for it. You just play, and then you forget about it and go back to it later, revisit that piece of music, and you might get something good out of it. So that's what I did with the Tibet Angel medley there. And the next thing was Valley of Eternity, which is probably my favorite piece on the record. I liked it back then, and it's one of those lucky things where the solo, you just get lucky. It probably didn't take too long to bang out, and there was an effect on the solo, and I think I used it a lot back then. It was called an electro-harmonic zipper, and those were old, from like the 60s or something, so they weren't very reliable, and eventually I started to look for a more modern envelope filter to take its place, and I got the Maxon auto filter, which I use a lot nowadays. It's not as insane as the zipper, but I don't want to go as insane as the zipper all the time, so the Maxon is perfect. But Valley of Eternity, I don't even remember writing it. It just came really quickly. It was probably written while I was in that apartment in Hollywood, and I had worked out the drum parts with Anders. It was probably much heavier of a rock song, and it was definitely much heavier of a rock song. And if I found the demo cassette of that, I could hear it in a rock context. But it was written to be rock, and it wasn't. It turned out being just this long, I don't even know how to describe it, but it had some very sweet melodies in it, and it wound up going to a climactic part at the end, which is something that I lucked into at the point. I lucked into at that time. Nowadays I'm very conscious of how to build a song into a climax and make it work. But in those days, I had no idea what I was doing, and I just lucked into it, and I knew it when I got it, so I kept it. But, I was very lucky. So the next song, I believe, is a song called West, which I had written because I had kind of stumbled onto the concept that Chinese music sounded like music in Western movies, like in cowboy movies. They use a lot of pentatonic motifs, and they kind of use a lot of the similar phrases, especially when played fast. If you listen to those old Western movies, the John Wayne type of movies, a lot of the themes, the background music has these kind of fast pentatonic string passages, whereas taken out of context are not too dissimilar to what was in modern Chinese opera music. And not so much the super ancient Chinese music, which is a whole different story, but I found that to be very interesting. So at that time I was really into Chinese music, and I just titled the song West because it felt kind of Western, but I was into Chinese music a lot, and I felt that Chinese music had a healing quality, and it also kind of worked in heavy rock and heavy metal because there's a lot of pentatonic influence in that. So there's that. And then there was a song called Realm of the Senses, which right now I kind of cringe at it because it was kind of an attempt to do something sounding Japanese, and it had this spoken word part at the beginning, which, it's just really cheesy now for me living in Japan for all this time. And actually I performed it live for the first and only time about a month or two ago. I was doing a show where I have a string section and a piano and my full band. So I did it for the first time. And being that it's in Japan, I was able to take someone from the audience out, pick someone out to actually read that cheesy intro. And one of my sweetest fans did it for me, a girl named Joyce. I hope you're listening. And she came up on stage, and we had written out that Japanese talking part, and she read it like a trooper on stage, and then we went into the song. But at that time I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it's really, really super cheesy. And if you were to take the lyrics, take the spoken word part and put it into English, it'd be something to the effect of, whenever I touch you, my heart gets warm and heart aches. And I don't have it in front of me right now, but it's just like super cheesy. But that kind of tells you where my head was at the point of time. And the title of that song was oddly from this art movie that I saw when I lived in Hawaii, called Realm of the Senses. And I'm not in any way any kind of art movie expert, but the topic was just so gruesome that I had to see it. It was about this dude who had this really strange fetish that the only way he could get excited was to have his testicles chopped off or something crazy like that. And that was just like super interesting. But the movie just made me absolutely sick. It wasn't a porno movie or anything like that, I don't think, because I remember seeing it in this little art theater in Hawaii. But oh my God, it was just such a horrible concept. But the title was really cool, so I stuck that title on the song, and there it is. So what was after that? Then there was a song called Night, which that song I played for years after that. I still play it now. How do you title an instrumental song? It just seemed like a nighttime type of thing. It was not a very up-tempo, happy song. But when I had originally written it, it was kind of up-tempo, heavy rock type of motif. But I brought it down a bunch of notches for this, and so Night was very cliche, a lot of cliche melodies in there. But I find that cliche melodies resonate with a lot of people. and cliche chord progressions. They resonate with a lot of people. And so it also allows you to a sweet interpretation. I'm not trying to appeal to jazz snobs, and I'm not trying to appeal to people who have heard everything and need something that's completely new, because, everything old is new again anyway, So I think my weapon, or my secret weapon, or whatever it is that I have, is in my interpretation of any melody. So any artist that I like, it's been like that. You take Elvis, all he did was sing other people's songs, but he made them so much his own that, you think of that song, you think of Elvis. And not that I'm in any way comparing what I'm able to do with Elvis's magic, but, whatever comes out is what comes out. And so Night is a lot of cliches, but I still think it's a gorgeous thing, and I still like playing it now. And so what's after that? Then there's Trance, which is a song that I actually wrote when I was about 15 with my good friend Tommy Gaddis. We had written a song called Lady Lady together. We were in a band called Deuce, and the song was actually a really hard-rocking, cool, heavy song back then. I was 16. And so he wrote the majority of the guitar parts, but the breakdown is something that I wrote. And that breakdown turned into Trance. That's all it is. It's the breakdown from a Deuce song called Lady Lady, which we never recorded or released or anything. And so many memories goes into that. At that time I was still doing things that weren't legal at the time and that I don't do nowadays. But a lot of childhood memories go into that when you come up with a riff that you like and you're 16. You're just like, whoa, I really, really like this. And so, we played it in Deuce for a long time, and it was one of our popular songs, and I remembered it. And I just thought it would be a cool little vamp, an untraditional song structure to connect Music on the Scenes album. And it turned out to be the most rock, minute and a half on the whole record. And, it's a very simple little thing that any 16-year-old could probably come up with, but to remember it that many years later and bring it back is something I was stoked about. And then the last tune on the record is called Triumph, but it's really my attempt at doing Thunder March with a different set of sonic capabilities. Still, like I said on the last podcast, that song has yet to been done. That song has yet to been performed properly. I love it. I think it's great. It represents me and my music and the melodic things that I try to do. But I just still don't think it's been done right and doesn't have the right interpretation yet. So if any of you people out there, it could be an EDM interpretation, it could be classical, it could be folk. I said before, I tried it on a gut string guitar with a semi-classical arrangement, and it sounded like a wine commercial. So I don't know. I need help on that. I need someone to, show me the way on that thing. So if any of you guys out there, this is funny. This is the same way I ended the other podcast. But anyway, thank you so much for caring about this stuff. I'm going to do my other ones sometime. Hopefully we can spend some quality time together during this extremely strange period of time in history. I'm just hoping that everybody comes out of it, having gained something and come out positive and healthy and all good things. And just thank you very much for your support. And, I'm coming up with new stuff now that I'm working on. I don't want to officially talk about it because then, it's a whole nother situation. But just know that I'm really, really happy about whatever it is I'm going to show you next. It's coming along really well. But that's all I'm going to say on that. So till next time, please keep healthy. and make friends here in this Facebook and on my Facebook group. If you haven't joined it yet, there's a lot of really super people in there, so super cool people. And sometimes I go in there and spy on what they're talking about and join in sometimes. So join the group. Thanks for everything, and I'll talk to you soon.